Okay, right angles number 3. We've talked about how whenever you have more than one right angle, you're going to have a set of parallels. You all know what right angles are. There's something else, though, that right angles make. They make corners. And when beginning students are trying to understand rendering, for example, and in illustration class I made a big issue of it all through the semester and always have, because almost every illustrator that works in any kind of realistic fashion uses what kind of lighting to define form? What? Yeah, but what do you call that kind of lighting that defines the form in space? Coarse shadows and reflected light. Every illustrator we went through, including Dr. Seuss when we went through him, there was only one that didn't. Not Aubrey Beardsley, Kai Nielsen didn't. But all of the other illustrators use this, and it's a great way to define form, is that you show how the coarse shadow falls along a segment. When beginners finally get that, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 semesters before they'll ever even dare to make up their own lighting and make a coarse shadow crawl along the plane changes. Usually, the problem with those coarse shadows is that they all look the same. There's a line that crawls around, and then there's hatching on the other side. Well, that's a start. At least you're trying to think about coarse shadows, but it's not enough. And the reason why is what I showed you when I showed you how form changes, that will become, that's a corner, which means if the light's coming from that way, this is what we call a hard plane change, which means that it's going to be light and then abruptly it's going to be dark, which you can show that plane change with a line. But if this is rounded like so, you do not want to show that plane change with a line. What would you start to do there? What do the comic book artists do? They give feathering, which in other words, those lines become an area. That's called a soft plane change. It's still a plane change. This part's facing that way and that part's facing that way. It is a plane change, but it's a soft one, and we'll talk about that more in the next few weeks when we talk about circles and ellipses. Right angles and variations on them make hard plane changes, which can be indicated in a line drawing with a line. Soft plane changes can't so well. If you're going to use lines to define soft plane changes, you'd wrap rubber bands around it, remember? But if you're doing a 2-point box, here I am doing exactly what I say beginners have trouble with. If you're doing a box, you see that line represents a corner, and it's called an exterior corner. What is an interior corner? Any interior corners there? Where? Which one? Nope. Let's make an interior corner. If we go like this, right? We're going to have to bring these down. There you've got an interior corner. They're both just lines, but one of them says that's projecting out, and this one says it's recessing away because of the context. Okay? And yes, it could. If you were Escher, it might be that. Put a little shading for the down plane there. Now we're going to talk about the difference between interior and exteriors, because they solve a problem in doing rooms, in doing buildings that have projections and recessions, and also they still are just as simple. They're as simple as an exterior form when you're doing an interior, because there's still 3 sets of lines. I haven't added any new sets. The difference between interior and exterior, as far as the 3 sets of lines, let's do an interior room here. And we'll do it in 2-point perspective and say that it looks like that. Okay? We're looking at the corner of a room there. In exterior perspective, you've got three sets. The verticals, the ones that go off to the right, which will be on the right, the ones that go off to the left, which will be on the left. When you're doing an interior view, it's the same way. There's a vertical, but the ones that go off to the left are on the right. The ones that go off to the vanishing point on the right are on the left. You get the idea? So you're just reversing a set to get that like that as opposed to like so. And it helps when you draw your cube. That's terrible perspective, isn't it? This is where we need to do a horizon line and find that should be going, that one's going there, that should be going like that. When you're drawing a box or a cube, take sections out of it. Make projections come out of it. And try to pull them into different directions, and you'll start to really grasp that. Now, in Ernest Watson's book, he has a chapter toward the beginning called The Structural Approach. The structural approach to drawing. The structural approach means, it assumes that any object, anything can be put in a box, or that can be reduced to simple forms like a box or a cylinder. And the structural approach is important because you know, if you have been a beginner or you're beyond it, that when you look at those earlier drawings, that they look wrong. I mean, when you're trying to make them look right, when you're trying to make them look like they exist in space, they look weird. And the reason why is because you did not understand the structure and how to define the structure with perspective in space. Structural ignorance versus knowing where the lines are. If you're doing the structural approach, it means you are able to draw the unseen lines, which in this case, of course, I'm not going to be able to do it here because I got lousy perspective that I haven't solved yet. But if I decide that my horizon line is there and I roughly start to make these conform to it, then it's going to be easy. Well, I guess it's not as bad as it might have been. Because you'll be able to draw what would be the whole bottom area of that as if it were made out of glass. And that is the trick. These are going to meet somewhere, and they should meet somewhere that's going to be perfectly vertical. Where those lines meet back there, that line, if it's perfectly vertical, should match up with that one. And you've got to be able to do that when you add other things on there that are projecting out or recessing back. The structural approach means that you see through things, that you have X-ray vision. It means that you have to know all the lines. Now, if you can do that, it starts to give you a freedom. You can cut things away. I think Watson used an example of where he had a box that was shaped something like this. I'm trying to recall exactly. And we were going to build something. You cut from there to there, and then you just run these lines around. That's going to that vanishing point. Where's that one going to go? That's going to go up to there. And then you use a little bit of your intuition to figure out, when you cut through like that, what lines are going to disappear. I think he had a shape like that. You sliced it away. You would know where the base would be back there, and you'd know that that line would go. And you ended up with something like a lawnmower. That's got to be vertical, and you got to work all these lines out. And if you want to get them real accurate, you're going to have to set up your T-square and triangle and all that and find the vanishing points. But the thing is that if you do that, you can cut any section, and it will just be a matter of 3 sets of lines, and then connect the dots and be able to draw through form. That's got to go like that. That's got to go like that. that's going to be vertical, that's going to connect up there, that's going to connect there. The structural approach is being able to see through things, and again, you're ending up with basically 3 sets of lines. Yes, this did create something we're going to talk about in a month, a vanishing trace, maybe a little more than a month. But we didn't even have to deal with that. We kept it simple by putting little dots where we're cutting and then connecting the lines. That's still keeping it simple, so you're only dealing with 3 sets of lines. And you're going to be able to understand what's on the other side of it. Now, here's where you get into trouble. When you try to draw a room, I had a series of slides that were photographs from this old Dover book of interiors in New York and stuff, interiors of the great ocean liners and stuff like that, a lot of different rooms. And I put them up on the screen, and we would have a minute and a half to try to draw that room. And people would complain and everything, and I'd explain, the trick is, try to see the room as a simple shape. Get the horizon line and get the great big simple shape. And there was one student who just would not get this, because she'd start with details. And I demonstrated 6 times at least, more than that, where we'd have that thing up there, and I'd say, get your picture plane. Now, try to figure where the furthest corner is. Now, see it as a great big simple shape, get your horizon line in there, try to see where those lines are going, and try to make it so that everything is getting to that. And then if there's furniture in there, and there's all this stuff, oh, there's a window there, and it kind of goes back. Try to figure out where that line is going to go to. Try to get that into there and carve that little section out of there. If there's furniture in there, project out of the wall. So get the big simple shape. And at the end of the semester, she wouldn't draw. She'd sit there like that and say, you are asking too much to draw a whole room in a minute and a half. My point is, you can't draw all those chairs and those people and those desks and the letters on those desks in a minute and a half. But you can't draw a room unless you are able to first think big, simple shape. Interiors, exteriors, boxes. And in that case, you've got all interiors, right? Let me make this bigger and simpler so that I can carry this through a bit. Let's do a room and say that the back wall, put our eye level about here, and a vanishing point over here, and a vanishing point over here. Make those vanishing points nice and obvious. That's the back wall. Let's say that there is a chair that will sit right there. That is the space on the floor that the chair will be. Then there's only 3 sets of lines, the ones that go off to the right, off to the left, and then the verticals. And you've got to somewhere determine how high that chair is, but only 3 sets of lines. And you can place that chair. Now we've got an interior and an exterior. And there can be variations on that, right? I mean, you can have a curved back on that chair that goes like so. But you're starting to think with the simple shapes. Now, if in this room, let's do another one over here to make it a little more complicated now. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make it one-point perspective because the concept I'm getting at is complicated. So I want to keep one-point perspective will make this simpler. Let's do vanishing point and horizon line right about here. And all the walls of the room that are going off to that vanishing point, we'll say that the back wall is something like that. So that's ceiling, wall to the left, wall to the right, floor. Let's put a coffee table in this room. We don't draw the top of the coffee table first. We'll draw the area that the coffee table would sit on. Then we could build that up. 3 sets of lines, the verticals, the horizontals, the ones that go back to the vanishing point. Okay, there's our coffee table. We can put little legs on there and so on. Now, since we're keeping this simple with only 3 sets of lines, let's say there's a chandelier hanging from that ceiling. And if the chandelier is hanging directly over the coffee table, how do you find it? Well, you could run a vertical line. Let's find the center of that coffee table. I'm going to find it on the floor because that's safer. If we could run an X through that to find the center of the coffee table and run a vertical line, where do you stop? I mean, it's going to run along that line somewhere if it's right over, but where? I mean, do I stop here, 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 here? Here's how you find out. Take a ride on one of the 3 sets of lines to get up there the way an ant would get up there. That is, there's only 3 kinds of lines. A horizontal line from the center of that coffee table will take you over there. Now what do we need? A vertical line to take us up to the top of the ceiling. Now what do we need? We need a horizontal, and where they intersect, that's where that chandelier is going to be. If the chandelier was just behind the coffee table, we'd simply find a point there and run it across there. If it was just in front of it, we'd do the same thing, because there's only 3 sets of lines. And so you can take a ride on one, we can start to build, if our eye level is right there, that means, let's make this a chandelier that starts out up here. We're going to be looking up at a cylinder like that. And we might have stuff here. Let's make it a chandelier that goes all the way down to here. Somewhere down here, we're going to be looking into the ellipses. That's going to be level. That we're going to be looking up at the ellipses. See, we could put a monster hanging on this chandelier. And if we put a monster hanging on the chandelier, and he's got his head sticking up like that, let's say that that's going to be where his eye is, and this is going to be his jaw. Notice we're looking up at him there. We're looking up at that simple shape. And if he's got a leg hanging down like that, that leg, we're looking which way? Which way should we be looking? Down on that foot. And then we can put the cylinder that leg's going to be. It's going to do all this same kind of stuff. We're going to build this thing out of simple shapes. We're looking up at that one, down at that one. But how do you find where things are placed? In a room that's got 3 sets of lines, whether it's 2-point or 1-point perspective, you can go just like you find the 5th floor in the California Federal Building. You're going to say, well, you've got to go west on Chapman until you get to Euclid. And then you will go south on Euclid until you get to Crescent, and then east on Crescent, and it will be north of you. That's all been just 2 directions, right? The north-south and the east-west. And then when you get to the California Federal Building, which way do you go? Up to the 5th floor. There's only 3 directions that you have a choice of navigating with, and that's how it is in 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective. You can get anywhere you want to if you'll just conform to those 3 vanishing points, 2 vanishing points, 1 vanishing point, depending on what kind of perspective it is, to find your way around front to back. Okay, now I've shown you how this works in a 1-point room. You simply take a ride on the 3 sets. Let me show you how it works in 2-point, not on an interior, but on an exterior, that is a human head. Remember I told you at the beginning of the semester the secret of draftsmanship is being able to draw the unseen ear? Okay, let's draw the unseen ear. Let's find out where it is. That's one of the ways you can tell if your draftsmanship is off. When it looks goofy, it's probably because you didn't know where that unseen ear was. If you don't know where the unseen ear is, I mean, that might not be important if it's really hidden, but if it's starting to come toward you, what about the unseen eye? Or what about the eye that's going over the hill over on the other side of the nose? You've got to be able to know where the lines go. I'll show you. Let's do a box that is in general 2-point perspective. I'm not going to bother to find the vanishing points because you understand that principle, right? That if I was to correct this, these should converge on a horizon line. For now, we can almost think of them as parallel. If we're going to build a head in there, we've got to find a line like so. There's going to be a brow line somewhere, and we're going to find a ball and an egg that should fit in there somewhere. Should be able to figure that there's going to be an ear right around there, a jaw that goes like this. Then we'll do this business where we break it up into simple planes. There should be a wedge that comes out like that somewhere. And I would just love to get rid of these lines that people say, they mess them up. I know that it's going to make a mess, but we need those lines in order to do what I'm going to show you. There is a jaw here, and we know where that ear should be because it's halfway back, and the height of it is on the height level of the brow, and the lowest point is at the base of the nose. So it's going to fit somewhere in there, okay? Now, there's a way, two-point perspective. We know that the height of that ear on the other side, that if we draw a line from there to the other side, which way are we going? We're going to what? The vanishing point over on the left, parallel with these. So it's going to fall on that line somewhere, but where? There's a couple ways to find out. We could take this line forward, right? It would be coming from that vanishing point. Go back over there to that corner, and then go where? Back to the right. There's only 3 directions we can go, back to the right. And where that intersects, that's going to be the top of the ear over there. And how do we find the bottom? Same way. Go like that, go back to that vanishing point, and then run a vertical. And we know that that hidden ear is going to be over. That's going to be the front part of it. Or actually, no, that would be the middle part of it. I would have been wiser to go the front part of it. And then we can do the same thing for how far back it goes. If we want to come up there, go across there, and then drop a vertical down, that hidden ear is going to fit over there. Do you see the thinking? Okay, it works in 2-point, it works in 1-point, it works in 3-point. The thing is that it helps you solve draftsmanship problems. You don't have to do that when you're drawing ahead in that position. You don't. When do you have to do that? I've got it too far back because I was using that middle point. It should be like so. When do you have to do that? You have to do it if you've got a person's head in that position and you're starting to tip them this way. You're drawing them a little bit more like that, and you want to know, when am I going to start to see that ear? And remember, I only drew the plan for the ear. In other words, a traced outline. I didn't project it out like that, which you'd do something like that over there for the helix of the ear. You do this a lot with hands because you can't see the origin of all the fingers, right? So you've got to draw the block of the hand, and you've got to know where that little finger that you can't see the origin of, where is it coming from? And you've got to be able to trace those lines back, looking through the hand as if it were made out of glass. Whenever you look at a Da Vinci or a Michelangelo or a Del Sarto hand, they knew where it was going. Whenever you look at a Hogarth, for the most part, or a Bridgman when he was sober, you can tell where that hidden source of the finger is. Okay, any questions about how this applies to rooms and objects? Because I'm going to go into something that's a little bit more confusing at first, which is how it applies to environments like the beach, when you've got people standing around on the beach. Any questions about it up to this point? Okay, let me reiterate what it is. The structural approach to any object you can put in a box, which includes rooms, which means that you're inside the box. The structural approach is being able to see the hidden lines. Why do you want to see the hidden lines? Because it gives you X-ray vision. It makes it so you can draw through the form and solve draftsmanship problems that way. Now, what happens, though, when you are drawing a picture where there is no object in a box or that looks like a box, and it's not inside a room? That is, for example, when you're drawing a scene taking place at the beach. There's a horizon line where the ocean meets the sky. And you've got a problem. You've got people standing around. Some of them are closer to you, some of them are further away. And as they get further away, they get progressively, or they seem to get progressively what? Smaller. How much so? Just an itty bit? That's right, but you've got to find, there's got to be some way to solve this. Now, there's an obvious solution when you're doing walls in a room. If you've got 3 windows on that wall, you can draw the lines on the wall and see how much smaller they get. It's also an obvious thing if at the beach somebody has built a fence to keep kids out of something, right? It's obvious how much bigger and smaller it goes because the fence has what? Right angles on it. It's made out of right angles, and so you can say that fence is shaped that way. But see, when we look at that, and if we wanted to put a fence down here, make it a little lower fence this time, one that we could conceivably see into, that's the trick as far as how people get bigger or smaller on the beach. But you have to find some kind of average. You say if an average person is 5'5", or for simplicity's sake, 5 feet or 6 feet would work out. It doesn't make any difference because you're going to adjust these. But if there's your horizon line, and you've got a person who takes up this much space, they stand like so, whether that's 5'5" or 6 foot. Every person, remember this is 1 point perspective we're dealing with right now. Every person on that horizontal line is going to be about that size, right? Okay. What about a person standing there, or there, or there, or there? We could put them all over the place. The way you find out, it would help if you decided who was furthest away. You know, if you could get this person on a line like that, say they're going to be like a fence. Who would you use for your next measurement to establish how wide angle your lens is? I'd do this person. And what would I do? I would run a horizontal line from there to there and say that's where their feet are, and then I'd go up there and then run a vertical line up to the top and say that's where their head is, and they'd be in a place like that. Now notice, they're not on that same line. I would erase this structural line. See, this person over here is going to be this tall, and I'm going to run horizontal lines over there to find their height. And this person is going to be right on that line, and they're going to be that high. And this person's going to be how high there? Only 3 kinds of lines, folks. There you go. You can do that all over the place. Do you see how I found them? I built a fence that went like that, and then like that, and they can go like this. There's only 3 kinds of lines. The vertical ones, the horizontal ones, vertical, horizontal, and the ones that go back to the vanishing point. Taking a ride on one at a time of 3 sets of lines, which means what? In X-ray vision, we talked about seeing through things. When you've got an environment that you're trying to do this, you have to do something a little different. You have to impose right angles on the world. You have to see lines in the air. You go to the beach, and generally, unless there was an album cover, I can't remember whether it was Yes or one of those ones that Hypnosis did, where they had bodies, naked bodies, but there's all these lines and kind of geometric things going on. You have to see that way in order to figure out how that will diminish. The 3 sets of lines work as in 1, 2, or 3 point perspective as long as things are kept simple, that is level, and not tilted around in different directions. When they tilt around in different directions, let's take that room again. That's the back wall. Our eye level is there, vanishing point here, vanishing point here. There's that room. If we have that coffee table there, that's actually, I just did that in 2 point when in fact it's, you know what I've done? This wall I'm looking right at, this wall is not at right angles to it. I just did a beveled wall that looks sort of like that. I got confused between 1 and 2 point. So let's bring them together and make it 2 point. If that connects like so. There's a 2 point room. Now, if we put a coffee table in there that's at one point, it's going to be on the same horizon line because it's level. There's our coffee table. It's going to fit there. 1 point coffee table, 2 point room. And then we can put a chair in there that has a whole different set of vanishing points. Now do you see what's happening? Let's see, that will go like so. 1 point, 2 point room, 2 point chair, but a different set of, you can put things and spin them all over the place. What it means is that this chair, if it's built like most chairs, is going to be consistent. All this stuff I'm telling you about is going to work. If you got little notches and things that come out, they're going to conform to all that business. If you've got something that goes back, it's going to go to that vanishing point. Likewise, if this has got lines on it, they're all going to go to that. If we've got windows on here, they're all going to work with this set of vanishing points that make it conform to that. And likewise, I guess it's over here. The window over there is going to do the same thing. You've got several sets of vanishing points. And now it's no longer simple, right? You could have 10 sets of vanishing points. In this room, because these tables are all scattered around, each one has its own set. The two where Dan is sitting have the same set because they're right there as if they were connected to each other. That's where it gets more complicated. But can you see how you can simplify? Everything on here that is at right angles to itself, that little world, 3 sets of lines. This little world, 3 sets of lines. This big world, 3 sets of lines. Okay? When it starts to tilt, if there's a kid sitting in that chair and he's leaning back on it, then it will change, and we'll get to that later when we get to tilted planes, vanishing traces. Any questions about this? Okay, I have one more thing to say about this, and it is the hazards of this. There are 2 hazards. The first hazard is that you will understand this and use it and make spatial integrity. That is accurate placement at the risk of compositional integrity. I've done this many times, working out all of these problems to make it correct, to make it accurate, and the composition stinks. It doesn't have to be that way. The proof that it doesn't have to be that way is John Singer Sargent and Goya and Drew Struzan. Drew Struzan knows perspective. He knows how to place people correctly. Why do they not fail at it? It's something that we do this semester in the first hour and a half of class. Is that if you do a separate comp study where you're not concerned with accurate placement, you're concerned with creating an abstract that carries feeling. If you say, my compositional study is a good abstract that carries feeling, then you've solved the problem. All this accurate placement will not kill it, any more than Goya or Drew Struzan's work looks dead because it's accurately placed when it is. Okay, that's hazard number 1, that you'll make spatial integrity and violate compositional integrity. The solution to it is do a comp study where you don't think about perspective at all. Hazard number 2 is that you will, in doing all of this accurate stuff and doing your monster so that it conforms to the principles of simple shapes, is that you will end up making not living people or angry monsters, but robots, automatons. Right? Everybody looks like they're made out of plastic. In other words, making robots, because you're concerning yourself with draftsmanship, you make robots instead of making it come back alive. So, how do you solve this problem of making it come back alive? What exercise do you do? Like compositional studies are an exercise. What exercise do you do so that you don't make robots? Gesture drawing. Let me remind you, Leonardo da Vinci did all this stuff. Have you seen his preliminary drawings for his big paintings, where he works out the perspective of every stare, of every detail in the environment where you've got horses and people in battle? He works out all this complex placement, but you would never say that it's a bunch of robots. And you would never say that about Rembrandt's work, and you'd never say that about Rubens' work. Rubens' stuff is dynamic and alive, and the people look like they're animated inside fleshy bodies. But there is a risk that when you're doing this, you end up not killing the composition, that's one problem, but killing the people, killing the characters and making them robots. The way you solve that problem is do gesture drawings. And next semester, we will do that for the whole semester. That'll be the first thing we do in class, is we'll do gesture drawings of figures in motion.